Ms. Okafor, before I can process your pre-approval, I need to ask you about 7 accounts on your credit report. The oldest opened in March of 2015, showing a combined balance of $61,000 tied to a business called Okafor Restaurant Supply, LLC, all registered to a Gwinnett County address you've listed as your parents' home. Ramiro Estrada set down his pen with the careful precision of a man who had already read the report twice and did not want to read it a third time. He was wearing a grey suit with the jacket unbuttoned, and there was a sticky note on the top right corner of the printed credit report, in front of him, yellow, his handwriting in blue ballpoint, that I could not quite read from my side of the desk. The First Meridian Bank offices had the flat, recycled air quality of every mortgage shop in the suburban corridor, floor-to-ceiling glass. A view of the parking lot where I had left my Honda with the sold sign still zip-tied to the antenna from my last apartment. And on Ramiro's desk, beneath a nameplate and a framed photo of 2 kids at a beach, a folder with my name on the spine. I had walked into that office on a Tuesday at 9:47 a.m., carrying a cashier's check for $11,900, 4 years of procurement coordinator salary, 2 tax refunds, 1 bonus I'd saved instead of spent, and the pre-approval letter I had framed and hung on my refrigerator 11 days earlier. The day after the email arrived, I had taken a photo of it before I left that morning. The kind of photo I knew I would want to prove to myself later that I had actually held this piece of paper in my hands and believed it meant something. The number 61,000 had not yet connected to anything in my body. It was still floating in the air between us like a figure I had heard in a news segment about someone else's bankruptcy. "I don't have any accounts with Restaurant Supply," I said. My voice was steady. I remember noticing my own steadiness and making a mental note of it. The way you note the temperature when you're about to get sick. Proof for later that you saw it coming. My father might, but I don't. Ramiro slid the printout across the desk. It was 30 pages. The pages clipped together at the corner, and across the top, in Experian sans serif font, was my name, my social security number, and a credit score I had never seen before. 589. The number registered first, before the accounts, before the balances. I had checked my credit score from a free monitoring app 6 weeks earlier. 724. The difference between them was the difference between a mortgage approval and a file dead on arrival. "When did you check that?" he asked, watching my face. 6 weeks ago, using my phone, the app said 724. Yes, those apps pull soft inquiries. They're not always current. He was being careful with his words, each one selected and set down like someone placing silverware at a funeral. This is what the bureaus are actually reporting. This is what I pulled this morning. The first account started at the top of page 2, a vendor credit line. Restaurant Supply Distributor, opened March 2015. Current balance $8,500. Account status open. Below it, business credit card. Opened May 2015, $14,200. Below that, commercial refrigerator lease. Opened June 2017, $12,800. I recognized the year. That was the year my father had called a family dinner and announced he had finally turned the corner with the business. The year he had taken my mother to buy a new car. The year he had booked a trip to Lagos and paid for Blessing to go with them. That was the year I had stayed home and worked 3 weekends to make up the time. The page was a taxonomy of my absence. Every debt, every credit line, every payment obligation bore my name and an address I had not lived at since I was 22 years old. Gwinnett County. My parents' house. The master bedroom where my father kept the receipt binder in a plastic file box. 30 years of household expenses, organised by month and category. Cross-referenced with tax returns. He had taught me the system when I was a child. "This is discipline," he had said. "This is how you protect what you build." The fourth account was where Ramiro had placed the sticky note. Commercial equipment lease. Account opened November 2017. Current balance $6,800. And at the bottom of the entry, in smaller font, recent activity, $340 charge posted 11 days ago. 11 days ago. I had been sitting at my kitchen table in my apartment in Decatur with my phone, confirming the closing date with the real estate attorney. 11 days ago, I had been texting with the movers. 11 days ago, I had picked out the paint colour for the second bedroom, a soft grey with a name like Riverstone. And I had been, for what I now understand, was the last time happy in a way that did not require explanation or apology. "That's recent," Ramiro said. His discomfort had a sound now, a shift in his chair, an adjustment to his tie. "That charge, the $340, that posted very recently. That tells me this isn't just a historical issue from years ago." I wrote down the number on the notebook I had brought. I had brought a notebook because I do everything the way my father taught me. I keep records. I had assumed the meeting would be routine. Recently, I wrote, 11 days ago, still active. There were 3 more pages of accounts. 7 total. A fleet fuel card, a supplier net 60 account, a secondary business line of credit. The numbers began to blur together into a shape I could not yet afford to see clearly. What I could see was the pattern, all opened when I was between 19 and 22 years old, all registered to my name, all billing to the Gwinnett County address, all tied to a business my father owned. "Your W-2 for 2015. Ramiro said, and I realized he had opened another file. What was your income that year?" I knew without looking. $9,200. I was in school. Campus job. He placed the W-2 on top of the credit report and looked at me. "There is no version of this," he said carefully, "where a 19-year-old with $9,200 in annual income opens 7 business credit accounts on her own. That's not..." He paused. He was choosing between several endings, and all of them involved saying a word he did not want to say to a customer sitting across his desk at a bank. "That's not a clerical error." The pre-approval letter I had framed was for $340,000. The house indicator was listed at $340,000. The down payment I had saved, $11,900, represented exactly 3.5% of that price, which was the minimum, which was all I could manage. The pre-approval was valid for 14 days from the date of issue. That meant I had 11 days left. The credit score on the pre-approval letter had been 724. which was sufficient. The credit score in front of me now was 589, which was not, in the time between the pre-approval arriving in my email and my sitting down in this office. Nothing about my financial behavior had changed. I had paid every bill on time. I had not taken on new debt. I had not missed a payment. The only thing that had changed was the truth about who owed what. What happens if I dispute these accounts? I asked. Ramiro pulled a form from the folder. You file a dispute with each bureau and each creditor individually. Each one is their own timeline, typically 60 to 90 days for the bureau investigation. But the creditors move slower. You're looking at several months to see these removed from your report. Maybe longer if the accounts have been dormant and your father disputes that the accounts are fraudulent. He hesitated. Has he disputed that? I had not called my father. I had not spoken to him since the bank meeting invitation had arrived in my email 2 weeks earlier. We spoke on the phone most Sundays. A conversation that followed a predictable script. He would ask about work. I would give him a professional update. He would tell me about the restaurant supply business, which he had been running for years, and I would listen to the pride in his voice as he described it. I had assumed my entire life that this business existed on its own terms, that it was separate from me, that my father had built it through his own effort and credit and work. I had assumed that the way he praised my financial discipline, my savings, my ability to manage on a procurement coordinator's salary without ever asking him for help was his way of saying he was proud of me. I now understood that the reason I had been able to manage on that salary was that I had never been managing alone. He had been building a second identity in my name. He had been using my credit, my future, and my trust as collateral while telling me every Sunday how proud he was of my self-sufficiency. I don't know, I said. I haven't told him yet. Ramiro nodded as if this made sense. And maybe to him it did. He worked in mortgage lending. He had probably seen 100 versions of this. Family members stealing from each other, identity theft, unraveling finances, and he had learned to let people have the conversation at their own pace. But his face had changed. The careful professionalism had dropped away, and what was left was something closer to gentleness. The kind of kindness that arrives only after you have seen someone realize that their life is about to become smaller than they planned. The pre-approval expires in 11 days, he said. If you want to move forward with the Decatur property, you'll need to get these accounts removed or get a written explanation from each creditor that you are a victim of fraud. You'll need documentation of your identity theft report. You'll need to work fast. I looked at the number 61,000 again. 7 accounts? 7 times my father had walked into a bank or filled out a credit application or signed a document with my name on it. 7 times. Between March 2015 and August 2019, he had decided that what he needed mattered more than what it would cost me later. The most recent charge, the $340 that had posted 11 days ago, suggested he was still doing it. He was still in that moment when I was sitting at my kitchen table signing closing documents in my head and choosing paint colors. Actively billing against my name, I picked up the credit report. All 30 pages. I held it the way you hold evidence, with 2 hands, at a slight distance, as though the paper itself might be evidence. It probably was. "What do I do?" I asked. "Start with a consumer protection attorney," Ramiro said. "Not the mortgage broker. Not me. Someone who handles identity theft cases. Because if those accounts were opened without your permission, that's not a credit dispute. That's a crime." The word hung there between us. Crime. Not mistake. Not misunderstanding. Not a family business arrangement that had gotten tangled somewhere along the way. Crime. I thought about the receipt binder. I thought about sitting at my father's kitchen table when I was 9 years old and watching him organize receipts by category. I thought about him teaching me to keep meticulous records, to save everything, to document every transaction, because that was how you protected yourself. I thought about him mailing me a framed copy of my first pay stub with a note that said, "This is the foundation of everything. Protect it." He had protected it, all right. He had protected it so well that he had spent 10 years building a business on top of it, while I was busy protecting the reputation of a man who never asked my permission for any of it. I closed my notebook. I picked up my pen. I wrote down Ramiro's name, his title, the date, the time, and the figure $340, the charge that proved this was not over, that someone was still using my name, still building debt in my identity, still operating in the space between who I was and who he had convinced everyone I should be. "Give me the forms." I said, "I'll start the disputes today." I was 18 when I packed a duffel bag and a plastic storage container into my Honda Civic and told my parents I would be back for Thanksgiving. I was leaving Gwinnett County for Georgia State, leaving behind a bedroom where my mother had alphabetized my books, leaving behind the receipt binder my father kept in the kitchen, a plastic file box organized by month and category, with every household expense for 30 years cross-referenced to tax returns. I was leaving to become someone my father had prepared me to be, a person who kept meticulous records, who did not ask for help, who understood that discipline was the architecture of independence. The first money I made was minimum wage, 15 hours a week at the campus library, shelving returns and processing late fines. I was a sophomore, 19 years old, and I opened a checking account at a branch near campus with $172 I had earned across 6 weeks of Thursday and Friday afternoons. I kept every deposit slip, every statement. The slips were white, printed with my account number, and I organized them in a folder I labeled by semester. My father had taught me that records were how you protected yourself, and I believed him completely. I called him after I made the first deposit. He did not say congratulations. He said, "Did you keep the receipt?" When I told him I had, I heard him exhale as though I had passed a test I didn't know I was taking. By sophomore year, I added a work-study position in the procurement office at the university hospital, where I learned that supply chains were logistics problems with dollar signs attached, and that if you understood the problem, you could solve it faster than anyone else. I would sit in the supply closet on my lunch break, a room the size of a closet, but lined with boxes, reading the invoices from the hospital vendors and noting the prices they were charging for things like IV stands and oxygen tubing. I found a cheaper supplier for gauze pads and showed it to the director, a woman named Linda in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She looked at my comparison spreadsheet for a full minute without speaking. And then she said, Keep doing this. That was all. Keep doing this. The hospital saved $800 a month on gauze. A procurement coordinator at Meridian Health Systems reached out to me 6 months before graduation. They had heard about the gauze project through Linda. Who knew someone who knew someone? Which is how things actually work in hiring if you are paying attention. I walked into their office for an informational interview with 3 questions that made the hiring manager pull out the org chart and explain the role. I was 22. My starting salary was $47,000 a year. The first thing I did was open a savings account and name it Decatur in my banking app. Decatur was a place I had driven through once. A town about 20 minutes south of Atlanta with tree-lined streets and older houses that had been restored. I had no idea what I was looking for in a home, or if I would even want to stay in Georgia. But I knew that Decatur felt like the physical proof that I was building something that belonged to me. Every month, I transferred money into that account. First $50, then $100. When I got promoted to senior coordinator at 26, handling relationships with the major medical device vendors, I increased it to $200. When I got a bonus at 28, I moved half of it into Decatur. The balance crept upward. $5,000, $7,000. By 29, I had saved $11,900, and I had looked at 43 houses online. I knew the price per square foot in neighborhoods that felt safe. I knew the property tax rates in Decatur. I knew that a 2-bedroom in the historic district would cost around $340,000. I knew that I could make that happen. My father called me almost every Sunday. These were calls where I reported my accomplishments the way you report weather. Factual, brief, not inviting commentary. I got promoted. I got a bonus. The department hired 2 new coordinators under me. I could hear the pride in his voice when he said, "You didn't ask anyone for help, did you? You just did it yourself." That was his highest compliment. It meant more to me than money. When I was home for visits, he would tell my mother in front of me, "She doesn't ask for anything." And my mother would nod as though this was a remarkable achievement, a sign of character. He said it the way other fathers said their daughter was beautiful. It meant I had learned the lesson. It meant I understood what he was trying to teach me. The receipt binder was the Bible of our house. I had grown up watching him maintain it on Wednesday nights after work, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of slips and envelopes, organizing each one into the correct category tab. The binder itself was tan-colored, plastic, with metal rings, and my father treated it with the reverence most people reserved for important documents. The tabs had labels: housing, utilities, food, transportation, medical, business, entertainment, miscellaneous. Within each tab, receipts were organized by date. In the front, there was a ledger in his meticulous handwriting, columns for each month, rows for each category, totals calculated by hand. He would compare this month to last year's same month and note if spending had increased. He would trace his finger down the columns and nod to himself, as though checking that the world still made sense. When I was 12, he had shown me the system. He had pulled out a receipt from the grocery store, explained how it fit into the food category, and taught me how to record it in the ledger. "This is how you know if you're being careful with your money," he said. "This is how you know if you're protecting what you have." By high school, I kept my own version in a composition notebook. By the time I moved out for college, I kept meticulous files on my laptop. Bank statements, organised by year, tax documents cross-referenced, mortgage pre-approval paperwork, in a folder labelled with the property address and the dollar amount we were targeting. This was not obsession. This was survival. This was the only way I knew to survive, by knowing exactly where every dollar was, by proving that I could manage, by not asking for anything because asking had never been safe in my family. When I was home for Thanksgiving in my senior year of college, my father handed me a small frame. It was my first pay stub from the university hospital. $28.54 for a 4-hour shift in the procurement office. The frame was simple. Wooden with a white mat around the check stub and glass in front. He had written on the back in his careful handwriting, "This is where everything starts. Keep it safe." I hung it on the wall of my first apartment, a studio in Marietta that cost $650 a month. I hung it in my second apartment, a 1-bedroom closer to work. I hung it in my third apartment, the one I had chosen in Decatur, the one I thought would be temporary while I saved enough for a down payment on a house. I thought that apartment would be where I transitioned from renting to owning, from being the daughter of someone else to being the owner of my own life. I did not know that someone had already claimed ownership of that future. I did not know that my name was already being used to build something I would have no choice but to pay for. The moment that matters happened on a winter break when I was 19. I'd been home for 3 days, and I was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when my father came in from the restaurant supply warehouse with the receipt binder. This was a Sunday morning, which was unusual. Usually, he organised the receipts on Wednesday nights. He sat down across from me and opened the binder to October 2015 and walked me through the month's categories. Rent for the warehouse, vehicle maintenance, business supplies, equipment repairs. His finger traced down the page. His reading glasses hung on a chain around his neck, and he pushed them up on his nose as he read. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a line item for equipment. "I replaced the refrigerator in the walk-in because the old one started leaking. I got a better price by going to a commercial supplier, but I had to open a business credit line to do it." He moved his finger down the page. "Do you see what I'm showing you?" I saw columns and subtotals and a pattern of careful spending. I saw the evidence of thought, of planning, of a man who understood that nothing was free. "Every dollar accounted for," he said. "Every transaction recorded. This is how you build a business. This is how you build a life. Your name is clean because I raised you right. Look, keep it that way." He placed his hand on top of the binder, and I remember noticing his hands. They were darker than mine, scarred from warehouse work, and his nails were cut short and clean. A clean name is more valuable than money. You understand that? "Yes," I said. I was 19. I had worked 3 jobs since I was 16. I had a savings account with $2,000 in it. I understood completely. What I did not know was that 2 months earlier, in October 2015, while he was explaining to me how he managed the business, while he was sitting with me at this very table, teaching me the religion of the receipt binder, he had already opened the first account in my name. He had walked into a bank or filled out an online application. He had used my social security number. he had listed the restaurant supply business as the reason. He had signed my name. I know this now because Ramiro at First Meridian showed me the opening date. Black text on white paper. I know this because I have the application in a file on my desktop. And I have spent hours matching his signature style to other documents I kept. His notes in the margin of the receipt binder. His handwriting on the back of that framed pay stub. The label tabs he created for my college files before I left home. But sitting at that table in 2015, I only knew what he told me. That a clean name was precious. That discipline was everything. That the lesson he was teaching me was how to protect myself. He had taught me well. That was the problem. I had learned to keep records of everything. I had learned to believe that my financial life was separate from everyone else's, and that, as long as I stayed disciplined, no one could touch it. I had learned to see my name as something sacred, something that could not be compromised. And he had learned from watching me that I would never question him. He had learned that the discipline he taught me would make me trust him completely. He had learned that a child who is praised for not asking for anything will not demand the truth about what has already been taken. I did not know any of this yet. I was 19, sitting at a kitchen table in Gwinnett County, watching my father explain the receipt binder to me, believing that he was preparing me for independence. It would take 10 years, and a loan officer setting down his pen, and a credit score of 589 for me to understand that he had been preparing me for something else entirely. A life where I would be so convinced of my own discipline that I would not see the theft happening underneath it. I sat in my car in the First Meridian parking lot for 14 minutes before I could turn the key. The pre-approval letter was still in its envelope on the passenger seat next to the 3 printouts Ramiro had given me. The full credit reports from Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, bound together with a single staple that had left a small tear in the corner of the paper. The kind of document that should have been a formality and was instead a map of a decade of theft. My hands were steady. I remember noticing that. I could have been holding a grocery list the way I held those pages, without tremor, without hurry. The sun was coming through the windshield in that particular way Atlanta sun does in May. Brilliant and without mercy. And I kept my eyes closed and my breathing even, and I did not think about anything at all. When I got home, and I don't remember driving, which should have alarmed me but didn't, I sat at my kitchen table with the 3 reports spread out in front of me like a crime scene, and a legal pad I had found in the drawer under the sink, the kind of pad a lawyer uses, cream-coloured paper with blue ruling, and I started writing. Not the emotional version of what had happened, not the story, but the data, the addresses, the account numbers, the dates, the balances, all of it, written down in my careful handwriting. The handwriting my father had taught me was the foundation of protection, because my father had taught me that the only way to protect yourself is to document everything. He had taught me that records were sacred. I was about to use that lesson against him. Vendor credit line. Restaurant supply distributors. Account open March 2015. Current balance $8,500. I had been 19 years old in March 2015, a sophomore at Georgia State, working 15 hours a week at the campus library, shelving books and processing late fines for students who did not care about due dates. My paychecks were thin envelopes with small numbers on them. I was making minimum wage. There was no version of this where a 19-year-old with my income would have any reason to open a business credit account with a restaurant supply distributor. But there it was, documented in black and white, and the address on file was not my campus address. It was Gwinnett County. It was my parents' house. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my photos from March 2015. Nothing remarkable. Midterms. A selfie at the library taken under fluorescent lights that made my skin look green. A photo of lunch. A sandwich from the cafeteria. The bread visible in the frame. The kind of evidence a poor student takes to prove they ate. The ordinary texture of being 19 and broken in school. Trying to build a future that belonged to me. Business credit card. Opened May 2015 for $14,200 outstanding. 2 months after the first account. Still 19 years old. Still making minimum wage. I scrolled forward 2 months in my phone. The photos moved forward in time. The same seasons, the same library lighting, the same meals, and the images were the same. Midterms, a friend's birthday party, the dining hall on a night when they served something I actually wanted to eat. My life was proceeding normally, was visible in images, was documented as real. While my name was being used to open credit accounts I had never approved, in places I had never been, signed by someone I trusted completely. But the third one stopped me. Commercial refrigerator lease. Account opened June 2017. Current balance $12,800. I did remember June 2017. I remembered it with the clarity that comes from joy, which is why I would remember it forever. June 2017 was the month my father called a family meeting and announced that he had finally turned the corner. He said those exact words. He sat at the head of the dinner table and he said it, and the room changed. I could feel it change. My mother reached over and squeezed his hand. That was the year he bought Adeyeze a new car, a Lexus Forest Green, the kind of luxury item that meant something in my family. That meant he was finally secure enough to buy my mother something beautiful, something unnecessary, something that proved he had made it. That was the year he took the entire family to Lagos for Christmas. He paid for my ticket. He paid for Blessing's ticket. He paid for hotel rooms. And we stayed in a place with clean sheets and working air conditioning. And he walked through that lobby like a man who had built something real. I had been so proud of him. That pride had been paid for by a commercial refrigerator lease opened in my name that I knew nothing about. I wrote the numbers down on the legal pad, pressing the pen hard enough that the letters came through on the page underneath. 2017. Refrigerator, $12,800. Then I sat with it for a moment and let my chest do what my face would not. Tighten like someone had taken a belt around my ribs and was cinching it slowly. Tighter and tighter until it hurt to breathe. The fourth account was a secondary business line of credit. $9,100 outstanding. Opened August 2018. I knew exactly when August 2018 was, because August 2018 was sacred to me. I was scrolling through my phone calendar now. Not photos. And I found it almost immediately. There, August 20th, 2018, that week. The The week I called my father from the Meridian Health Systems office and told him I had just been offered a full-time procurement coordinator position. Not entry-level, not junior, full-time senior coordinator. $71,000 a year. I had been so careful to tell him before I told anyone else, because I wanted him to know first. I wanted him to be proud. I wanted him to understand that the lessons he had taught me about discipline, about not asking for anything, about building something on your own, had worked. That I had done it. That I had made it happen. I can still hear the sound of his voice on that call. The way it changed when I told him. The way it lifted. Congratulations, Valerie! I always knew you would do something big. You don't ask anyone for help, do you? You just do it yourself. That was what he said. Those were the exact words. Pride in his voice. My father hearing that his daughter had succeeded. And while I was sitting in that office receiving congratulations, while I was in a meeting room with windows that overlooked Atlanta, while I was telling my father about my achievement, and he was responding with pride and validation, he, or someone acting as him, was signing a secondary business line of credit in my name. The application was processing. The paperwork was moving through a bank system. My achievement and his appropriation were happening in the same moment, separated by maybe 5 miles of Atlanta traffic and the space between 2 phone towers. I had to stand up. I stood up and walked to the refrigerator and poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink. Just held it, the cold of the glass against my palm, a small reminder that my body still worked. That I was still real, that I was not having a fever dream where my father had spent the last 4 years systematically stealing from me while congratulating me on my success. Fleet Fuel Card. I opened November 2016. $3,200 outstanding. Supplier Net 60 account. Opened September 2015. $6,400. I wrote them down without looking for memories because I was beginning to see the pattern now. And the pattern was worse than any individual account could be. This was not a moment of desperation. This was not a man making a single bad decision and regretting it. This was methodical. This was patterned. This was a man who had decided at some point in March 2015, when his daughter was 19 years old and making minimum wage, that he would use her name and her credit as a tool to build his business. And he had spent 4 years executing that decision with precision. The 7th account was the equipment lease. $6,800. The one with the recent charge. The one Ramiro had placed a sticky note next to. I had written that down already, in the bank, when I was still processing the shock. But looking at it again, in the context of all the others, it hit differently. This wasn't historical. This wasn't something my father had done years ago and then stopped doing. Something I could rationalize as a mistake he had already moved past. This was active. This was current. Someone was still billing against my name. Someone was still using me. I looked at the 7 accounts again. All of them on the legal pad now. All of them documented in my careful handwriting. 7 lines of credit. I had added them up already, but I added them again, writing out the sum on a new line. $8,500 plus $14,200 plus $12,800 plus $9,100 plus $3,200 plus $6,400 plus $6,800 equals $61,000. The number that had killed my mortgage pre-approvals. The number that had transformed my credit score from 724 to 589. The number that had turned a saved down payment into meaningless money sitting in a savings account I had named Decatur, after the place where I was supposed to build my life. I sat with that number for a long time. I sat in my kitchen while the night turned darker and then began to turn light again. And I understood what I was going to have to do. I was going to have to call my father. I was going to have to ask him why. I was going to have to hear him explain himself. And I was going to have to listen with the composure my family had trained into me. The composure that had made me easy to lie to, because I never let anyone see me break. But first, before I made that call, before I did anything that came next, I opened the documents Ramiro had given me, and I looked at the account opening applications themselves. 3 of them had handwriting on them. 3 of them had a signature under the cardholder line. I laid those 3 applications side by side on my kitchen table, and I examined the handwriting like a forensic expert, comparing letter formations, the way the T was crossed, the way the S curved, the pressure of the pen against the paper. I compared it to things I knew were in my father's hand. Notes in the margin of the receipt binder, the label tabs he had made for my college files, the inscription on the back of the framed pay stub he had mailed me when I got my first job. This is where everything starts. Keep it safe. His handwriting, his careful precision, the same precision I was using now to prove what he had done. The handwriting matched. Every letter, every loop and cross and careful line. My father had signed my name, not forged it in a way that looked nothing like it. He had signed something close enough to my signature that it had fooled a bank officer. Or perhaps the bank officers had not looked closely enough. Or perhaps they had not cared. What mattered now was that I had proof, written in his hand, dated in years when I was building a life he was simultaneously tearing apart. I copied the 3 applications onto the scanner and saved them to my laptop. And I made a folder called Evidence, and I put them in it. And I sat there in the chair with my hands flat on the table, and I understood that my life had fundamentally changed in the time between walking into First Meridian Bank and sitting at my kitchen table at dawn with 3 credit reports and 7 lines of credit documented in my handwriting and my father's signature forged under my name. I was no longer the person who lived in this apartment and worked at Meridian Health Systems and had named a savings account Decatur. I was now the person who had been stolen from. That was my identity now. That was what I was, the woman whose father had used her name, her credit, her trust, and her future to build a business she had never been asked to fund. The woman who had walked into a bank to close a mortgage on a home she had saved $11,900 to purchase, only to learn that someone else had already claimed her creditworthiness for their own purposes. I looked at the evidence folder on my laptop screen. The 3 applications with my father's handwriting signing my name. The legal pad with the 7 accounts and their balances written in my careful hand. The credit report with their $61,000 in debt spread across accounts opened in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. The timeline of my betrayal. The map of how a man I had trusted completely had spent a decade turning his daughter's future into his profit. I did not cry. I did not feel angry yet. I felt clear. I felt precise. I felt like someone who had finally been given accurate information about something she had been lied to about and was now beginning to understand what she would have to do next. I closed the laptop. I turned off the light. I left the legal pad and the 3 credit reports on the kitchen table. And I went to bed knowing that when I woke up, I would have to make a phone call I did not want to make. And then I would have to do something I had never done before. I would have to stop protecting the reputation of a man who had never protected me. I drove to Gwinnett County on a Thursday afternoon, 4 days after Ramiro set down his pen and told me that what my father had done was not a clerical error. I had printed out the 3 account applications where his handwriting was visible, the ones where he had signed my name on the cardholder line. I had printed the first page of each credit report. I had printed out the FTC identity theft complaint I had filed at 11:47 p.m. sitting on my bathroom floor, with my phone trembling in my hands. I had put all of it in a manila folder. The kind you find at any office supply store. Nothing special. Nothing that prepared me for what I was about to do with it. I had placed that folder on the passenger seat next to me, and I had driven an hour north to the house where I grew up. My mother was not home. That was intentional. I had called the house the day before, and when my father answered, I had asked for her. And when he told me she was at her church volunteer shift on Wednesday afternoons, I had said I needed to talk to him about something, and then I had hung up before he could ask what, before he could tell me not to come. I had chosen a day when she would be gone. I had chosen to do this without her there to mediate, without her there to soften what he had done into something that could be forgiven if I just tried hard enough to understand his perspective. The house looked the same as it always did. The driveway was the same length. The front door was the same color. I had half expected some physical transformation, some visible sign that something fundamental had shifted. But the house was just a house. The kitchen where he had taught me about the receipt binder looked exactly as I remembered it. The table was exactly as I remembered it. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, and he was exactly as I remembered him. Except now, I understood that the man I had remembered was not the man who was standing in front of me. He was at the counter, pouring coffee from the carafes into a small white mug. When he heard my car in the driveway, he had turned around, and when I came through the kitchen door, he was standing there with the mug in his hand, and I watched his face move through a series of expressions like someone flipping through cards. Surprise, then pleasure at seeing his daughter, then a settling into something cautious, something that suggested he was running through scenarios, trying to figure out what this unannounced visit meant. "Valerie," he said, "is everything okay?" That was his opening line. Is everything okay? As though he did not already know that everything was not okay. As though I had not told him on the phone that I needed to talk to him about something serious enough that I had driven an hour during the middle of my workday to his house on a Thursday afternoon. "I need to show you something," I said. I did not hug him. That was the first break in the pattern. I had always hugged him when I arrived home, had always moved toward him, had always initiated physical affection. I did not do that this time. I just dropped my bag on the counter and pulled out the folder. He noticed the break. I could see it register in his face, a small tightening around the eyes. We sat at the table. The same table where he had shown me the receipt binder when I was 19. Where he had placed his hand on top of the plastic and told me that a clean name was more valuable than money. And I opened the folder. I did not explain first. I did not give him context or prepare him. I simply slid the pages across the table. The first account application, the second, the third. All of them printed in black and white. All of them with his handwriting on the line where the cardholder's name should be. All of them with my name signed in a style close enough to mine that it had fooled a bank. Or the bank officers had not looked closely enough, or they had not cared. He looked at the papers for a long moment. His coffee cup was still in his hand. And I watched him set it down on the table without taking a sip. He did not look at me. He just looked at the papers. His eyes moving across the pages as though they might say something different if he read them a second time. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted into something that sounded like confusion. But it was a performed confusion, a confusion he was trying on to see if it fit. "I don't know what accounts you're talking about," he said. "The vendor credit line from March 2015, I said. I was reading from my notes. I had written everything down. The business credit card from May 2015. The commercial refrigerator lease from June 2017. The secondary business line from August 2018. The fleet fuel card. The supplier net 60. The equipment lease. Valerie, I don't. All opened when I was between 19 and 22 years old. All registered to Okafor Restaurant Supply, LLC. All to an address in this county. At this house. All signed by you." I slid one of the applications closer to him. "That's your signature on the cardholder line. Not mine. Yours. And your handwriting on the application." He picked up the application and he held it. And I could see the moment something shifted in him. The moment he realized that the denial strategy was not going to work. That I had done the work. That I had spent the last 4 days pulling reports and scanning documents and building a case against him. That I was not here to be confused or persuaded. He set the application down on the table and he leaned back in his chair. The position change was deliberate. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was softer, but not gentle. It was the voice of a man who had moved to a different strategy. "I used your name because the bank wouldn't lend to me," he said. "They said I didn't have enough credit history. I was trying to establish credit for the business, and they kept saying no. The bank said I was too new, too much risk. So I opened some accounts in a way that would work." His hands were flat on the table now. His fingers were spread out, and I could see a small cut on his right hand, the kind you get from working with metal or machinery. He had been in the warehouse before I arrived. He had come home and poured himself a cup of coffee. "But I built something real, Valerie," he continued. "I built Okafor Restaurant Supply from nothing. Do you understand what that means? This family benefited from that. You benefited from that. You lived in this house because I built that business. You ate food at this table because I built that business. The education your mother wanted for you, the trip to Lagos, all of that came from what I built." This was the second position. This was him moving from "I didn't do it" to "I did it." But here's why it was actually justified. And the logic of it was almost seductive, if you let it be. If you accepted the premise that a father who builds a business is justified in using his daughter's name without permission. Then yes, the family had benefited. Yes, she had eaten from that table. Yes, she had taken his money for college. Not much, but some, and he had not forgotten it. My chest felt tight, not from sadness, but from the effort of staying composed. I could feel my breathing shift, could feel my body preparing to fight. But I kept my voice steady. "That's not how credit works," I said. "You can't just borrow someone's name because you think it will help your business. You can't sign their name on documents. That's fraud, Dad. It's illegal. It's identity theft. It's not fraud if it helped the family," he said. He was leaning forward now. He was getting animated. His hands came up off the table. He was trying to convince me that theft was acceptable if the thief was a father and the victim was his daughter, and the proceeds had theoretically benefited us all. I was trying to do right by all of you. I was trying to build something that would support us. And I did build it. So how is that fraud if it helped us all? But I did not say anything. I just looked at him, and I waited, because I knew there was more. With people like him, people who had convinced themselves that their actions were justified, there was always more. "You're my daughter," he said, and his voice had shifted again. It was harder now. "I raised you. I took care of you. You owe me." There it was. The third position. The entitlement. The belief that love and provision came with a bill attached, and that I had been running a tab my entire life without even knowing it. "You lived in my house," he continued. His voice was getting louder now. His control was slipping. "You ate my food. You wore clothes I paid for. You carried my name. You carried my name for free. Valerie. And I made that name mean something in this community. I made it mean hard work and discipline and honesty. And now you want to come here and tell me that I committed fraud against you? Against my own daughter?" The irony was so complete, it was almost beautiful. He was invoking honesty while defending his right to forge my signature. He was invoking family while explaining why he had used my identity without permission. He was invoking sacrifice while describing the benefits he had gotten from stealing from me. He was invoking love while proving that love, in his accounting, was just another transaction. I stood up. That was when I knew I was done with him. Not angry yet. I was not angry yet. That would come later, in waves and in moments I could not predict. But clear. I was clear that this was a man I could not reason with. A man who had convinced himself so completely that his actions were justified, that he could not see the theft underneath them. A man for whom love and use were exactly the same thing. "I'm going to have to fight you on this," I said. My voice was quiet. "I'm going to have to get a lawyer. I'm going to have to file complaints. I'm going to have to prove that those accounts were opened without my permission." He looked at me, and his face shifted one final time. The initial confusion was gone. The rationalization was gone. The invocation of love was gone. What was left was something harder. Something that looked almost like contempt. The look of a man who realized his daughter was not going to accept his narrative, and who was now preparing to fight her using the only tool he had left. He leaned back in his chair again, and he said something that changed everything. "You'll never prove I didn't have your permission," he said. The logic of that sentence was broken, and he knew it was broken. And he said it anyway. "You'll never prove I didn't have your permission." The sentence was an admission disguised as a defense. It meant, "I used your name." It meant, "I signed documents on your behalf without consent." It meant, "I did the thing you're accusing me of doing, and the only question now is whether I had the right to do it. And I'm betting you can't prove I didn't ask you first. Even though I didn't. Even though you know I didn't ask you first. Even though I didn't. Even though you know I didn't. Even though I know you know. But maybe a judge won't. And that's the only thing that matters to me now." I did not respond. I just turned around and I walked out of the kitchen. And I heard him say something else behind me, something about family and about how we didn't handle things this way. But I did not turn around. I did not acknowledge it. I kept walking until I got to my car in the driveway. And I sat down behind the wheel and I opened the notes app on my phone with shaking hands. And I typed, "You'll never prove I didn't have your permission." I sat there for a long time before I pulled away. I could see my father standing in the kitchen window, watching me. He did not come to the door. He did not come to the car. He just stood there, behind the glass, watching his daughter sit in her own car, in his driveway. And I understood in that moment that whatever relationship I had thought we had was already over. It had been over since March 2015. I just hadn't known it yet. I pulled away slowly. I did not look back at the house. I drove back to Atlanta in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of the road and my own breathing. And when I got home, I called Patricia Harlow and I made an appointment to see her. And 6 days later, I sat in her office in a building with floor-to-ceiling windows, and I pulled up that note on my phone, and I read her that sentence, and I watched her understand what it meant. I watched her understand that he had admitted to the very crime he was denying, and I watched her write it down. My father called my mother before I even got back to Decatur. He told her his version first, shaped and softened the way only a man with practice can shape it. By the time I was walking through my apartment door, she had already started making calls. By Wednesday evening, 6 days after I sat at the kitchen table in Gwinnett County and listened to him tell me I owed him for the food I had eaten and the clothes I had worn, the whole church knew a story about me. Not the true version. Not the version where I had printed out documentation of fraud, where I had scanned his handwriting on loan applications, where I had filed an FTC identity theft complaint. Not the version where my father had forged my signature on loan applications and built a business on the foundation of my destroyed credit. The version that had traveled through Redeemed Victory Chapel was that Valerie Okafor had become ungrateful, that she was attempting to drag her father's name to the authorities over a family matter, that she was willing to destroy their reputation, their standing in the community, to punish him for something that had happened years ago and was already in the past, that she had forgotten everything her parents had sacrificed for her. The story had been shaped and reshaped as it moved through the network, through my mother's sister in the administrative office, through the woman who ran the women's ministry, through family friends who had known my parents since before I was born, through the elder prayer line that met on Tuesday mornings and Wednesday evenings at the church. Each time it was repeated, it acquired new details and new interpretations. Valerie was angry. Valerie was being manipulated by outside forces. Valerie had always been difficult, always needed to be right, always needed attention. By the time it reached me, the story had the weight of community consensus, the weight of people who had watched me grow up, who had known my father longer than they had known me, who had a vested interest in believing that families should stay together and internal problems should stay internal. The phone call came on a Wednesday night at 7:15 p.m. I was sitting on my couch with my laptop open, refreshing my email obsessively, checking to see if Patricia Harlow had responded to my message, when my phone rang. The number was not my mother. It was not Blessing. It was Gerald Whitmore, a church elder I had known since I was 8 years old, a man who had baptized me at Redeemed Victory Chapel when I was 13 in front of the entire congregation, a retired civil engineer with white hair and hands that were always clean and a voice that had always sounded like authority to me, like someone who knew how things were supposed to be done, like someone who knew the rules. "Valerie," he said when I answered. His voice was warm, gentle. "I wanted to reach out to you personally. Can we talk?" I knew what this call was before he opened his mouth. I already knew. But I said yes anyway, because I was still operating under the assumption that if I explained clearly enough, if I presented the facts carefully enough, people would understand. I did not yet understand that understanding was not the goal. That explanation would not help me. That clarity of facts meant nothing when the narrative had already been constructed. Silence was the goal. Compliance was the goal. Reputation management was the goal. "I'm calling as an elder," he said, "and as someone who has watched you grow up in this congregation. And I want you to know that whatever is happening between you and your father, the church wants to help mediate. We want to see this resolved. We want to see your family healed. It's not something that can be mediated." I said. My voice sounded strange to me, too thin, too young. "He opened accounts in my name without my permission. He signed my signature on documents. That's fraud. It's illegal." "I understand that you feel hurt," he said, and I heard the shift in his voice. He was moving into the role of mediator, which meant he was already positioning himself as the reasonable one, and me as the emotional one. The one who could not see clearly because emotion was clouding her judgment. "Family situations are complicated. Valerie, your father built something. Okafor Restaurant Supply is a real business. It provides jobs in our community. Your father has been generous to the church. Perhaps he made some decisions that seemed reasonable at the time. But I don't think we need to involve the authorities. I don't think we need to air this in public." "It's not about airing it in public," I said. "It's about holding him accountable for what he did." "Valerie," his voice was gentler now, which was worse. "Gentleness is harder to argue with than anger. We don't do this to our fathers in public. We don't go to the authorities over family matters. We handle these things as a family, within the family, going to the authorities, involving lawyers. That's a path that will destroy your relationship with your father permanently." "Is that really what you want? Is that really what's best for you?" I understood what he was asking. He was not asking if I wanted accountability. He was not asking if I wanted justice. He was asking if I was willing to protect my father's reputation at the expense of my own future. He was asking if I understood that my value in this situation was my willingness to stay silent. He was asking if I understood the hierarchy. My father's reputation was worth more than my financial security. The church's harmony was worth more than my credit score. Family loyalty was worth more than my ability to own a home. My credit is destroyed. I said, I can't get a mortgage. I had a pre-approval. I had saved down payment money for 4 years. I can't move forward with anything until this is resolved. And it can only be resolved if I hold him accountable for what he did. I hear you, he said, and the sadness in his voice was almost worse than anger would have been. I really do. But I want you to remember that you are part of a family. Valerie, and families need to protect each other. Your father made a mistake. Yes, in his own way. But he's still your father. The community is still your community. These are the people who love you. Is it worth losing both of those things to prove a point? That was the threat, delivered as a question. That was the implicit message. If you go forward with this, the community will not support you. Your family will not support you. Your mother will have to choose between you and your father. And she will choose your father because that is what wives do. Your sister will choose the family because that is what families do. You will be alone. I got off the phone after another 5 minutes of him explaining how the church could help, how mediation could help, how prayer could help, how forgiveness could help, none of which addressed the fact that my father had committed a federal crime against my name, my credit, my future. I do not remember exactly what I said at the end. I just remember the moment the call ended, and the silence that followed, and the weight of understanding that I was now positioned as the problem. I walked to my bathroom, and I sat down on the tile floor with my back against the wall. The tiles were cold. The bathroom was small, barely bigger than a closet, and the light was fluorescent, harsh, the kind of light that makes you look worse than you are. I sat there and I did not move. I did not cry. I just sat there with my phone in my hand, watching the screen, waiting for blessing to call. My sister was 23. She was a sophomore at Georgia State. She would have heard the story by now. Our mother would have called her, or one of our aunts would have reached out to her, or she would have seen something in the church chat or the family group text. She would have heard that her sister was attempting to destroy their father's reputation, that her sister was being difficult and ungrateful, that her sister had forgotten everything her parents had sacrificed. I waited for her to call and ask me what was really going on. I waited for her to be the person I thought she was. I waited for her to choose me, or at least to choose the truth. I sat on that tile floor for 11 minutes. I counted them. Each one felt like a small rejection, a small confirmation that I was alone in this. 1 minute, 2, 3. By minute 5, I understood that she was not going to call. By minute 8, I understood why. By minute 11, I understood that she had made her choice, just as my mother had made her choice, just as my father had made his choice years ago when he decided that his business was more important than my future. I texted her, "Can you call me?" No response. I called her. It rang and then went to voicemail. Her voicemail greeting sounded happy, normal. I sent her a message on Instagram. I sent her a Snapchat. I did everything except force her to engage with me. And she did not. Her read receipts were turned off. Her last post was 3 days ago. A photo from a study group at Georgia State. Her and friends smiling over notebooks. Normal life. Her life continuing as though nothing had happened. Her choice had been made, and it did not include me. I sat there for another minute. I did not move. I did not stand up. I did not call my mother or text Blessing again, or reach out to anyone else in the family. I just sat there, and I felt the weight of it, the isolation, the positioning as the villain, the understanding that in choosing accountability, I had chosen loneliness. And in that moment, I almost believed them. I almost accepted the narrative that had been constructed around me. I almost picked up the phone and called Patricia Harlow and told her I was sorry. I had made a mistake. I could not do this. I could not move forward if it meant losing my family and my community. I could not hold my father accountable if it meant being alone. I almost decided that protecting my family's reputation was more important than protecting myself. Then I thought about the mortgage. The $340,000 house in Decatur that I had saved $11,900 to purchase. The down payment that would be meaningless if I did not fix my credit. The future that I would lose if I accepted the version of events the church was circulating. The life that would never be mine if I decided that my father's reputation mattered more than my own ability to build something. I stood up. I walked to my phone, and I called Patricia Harlow. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night, and I left a message on her voicemail. "This is Valerie Okafor," I said. My voice was steady. I was not crying. I was not angry. I was just clear. "I'm ready to proceed. Whatever you need from me, I'm ready to move forward with this." I filed the FTC identity theft report at 11:47 p.m. on the night I sat on my bathroom floor. My laptop was open on my bed, the screen casting a blue light across the dark room, and I filled out the form methodically, the same way I filled out everything else in my life, with attention to detail, with documentation, with the understanding that the paper trail was the only thing that would protect me now. The form asked for dates, for account numbers, for the specific ways in which my identity had been used without authorization. I uploaded the 3 credit reports I had pulled that weekend. I listed all 7 accounts with their balances. I provided dates and dollar amounts with the precision of someone who had already documented everything. I described how I had discovered the accounts, the bank meeting, the credit report, the shock of seeing my name attached to debts I had never incurred. I submitted it, and the website gave me a confirmation number and a case file number, and it told me that the Federal Trade Commission would review my case and contact me within 30 days. Then I called Patricia Harlow the next morning at 9:30 a.m. I had gotten her name from a colleague in HR at Meridian Health Systems, a woman named Rebecca who worked in benefits and who had once mentioned, in passing, that she had been through something similar years ago. Not identity theft, but a situation where the person she trusted most had used her in a way she hadn't anticipated, in a way that had required legal intervention to undo. When I asked her who she had hired, who she had trusted to help her fight back, she gave me Patricia's number without hesitation and without elaboration. "She's someone who does not blink," Rebecca had said. "She doesn't sugarcoat anything. If you're looking for someone to make you feel better, call someone else. If you're looking for someone to win, call Patricia." The phone was answered by a receptionist who asked my name, and then there was a pause while she checked a schedule. And then Patricia Harlow picked up the line directly. She was 38 years old, and she sounded like someone who had heard variations of this story 100 times and was not going to waste my time with sympathy or pleasantries. "Tell me what happened," she said. No greeting, no introduction, just the opening prompt. I told her about the 7 accounts, about the credit report reveal at the bank, about Ramiro setting down his pen, about the kitchen table confrontation with my father and his 3 positions. Denial, then rationalization, then entitlement. About the church elder's phone call and the implication that I was betraying my family by moving forward with this. I told her all of it in about 5 minutes, and I did not cry, and I did not ask for reassurance. When I finished, she said, "I want to meet with you in person. Bring everything you have ever kept. W-2s, tax returns, pay stubs going back to 2015, any documents related to Okafor Restaurant Supply, any communications from the creditors, any statements from the accounts. Bring anything with your father's handwriting on it. Bring anything with your social security number on it that you didn't authorize. If you don't know whether it matters, bring it anyway." The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Harlow Legal Group, which was located in a downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and the kind of quiet that suggested money and professional accomplishment. But Patricia's office was on the 5th floor, smaller than I expected. Just a desk, 2 chairs across from it, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves with legal volumes organized by subject, and a window that looked out over Atlanta. She was wearing a grey blazer and reading glasses on a chain. And when I came in, she did not stand up to greet me. She just looked at me over her glasses and nodded toward the chair across from her desk. I had brought 2 folders, both stuffed with documents. One folder held my personal financial documents, organized chronologically from 2015 to the present. Plus every W-2 from my campus job, every pay stub from Meridian Health Systems, every tax return I had filed, every bank statement I had kept. The other folder held anything I could find related to Okafor Restaurant Supply. Business cards my father had given me, documents that had been sent to the house, anything that carried the name of the business. I had spent 6 hours that weekend going through my files, pulling everything out, scanning documents that were old and fragile, organizing it all by date. I had made notes about where each piece of evidence fit into the timeline of fraud. I had color-coded the documents with sticky tabs. Yellow for dates when accounts were opened. Blue for my income documentation. Green for evidence of his handwriting. Patricia took the folders and did not open them immediately. She just held them, feeling the weight of the paper, and then set them on her desk and looked at me. "Walk me through this again," she said. "Start from the beginning. Tell me when you first learned about the accounts." I told her about the morning I walked into First Meridian Bank thinking I was going to finalize a mortgage. About Ramiro setting down his pen and asking me about 7 accounts. About the credit score of 589 that I had never seen before. She was taking notes, not on a computer, in a leather notebook with a fountain pen. The pen moved across the page with precision. "Your believed credit score?" she asked. 700, and 24 from the free monitoring app. And the actual score pulled by the bank? 589. How much time elapsed between when you checked the app and when the bank pulled the report? 6 weeks. She wrote that down. The timeline was important. The gap between what I had known and what was actually true was evidence of how recent the fraud had been. How active? How ongoing? Mortgage pre-approval amount? She asked. $340,000. Down payment you had saved? $11,900. And how long had you been saving? 4 years. She set down the pen and opened the first folder. She pulled out my 2015 W-2, the first year the accounts had been opened. The amount was printed clearly in the boxes. Only $9,200. That was my entire income that year. Campus wages, 15 hours a week at minimum wage. The money I had earned while my father was using my name to build his business. Then she pulled out the March 2015 credit application, the vendor credit line with a restaurant supply distributor. The first account opened 2 months before I had sat at that kitchen table, and my father had told me that a clean name was precious. She placed them side by side on the desk. The W-2 on the left, the credit application on the right. There is no version of this where a 19-year-old with $9,200 in annual income voluntarily opened a business credit account. She said. Her voice was flat, factual, matter of fact. That there is not an oversight. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a crime. She did not say it with anger or outrage. She said it the way someone states a fact, the way someone whose job is to look at evidence and name what it is, says what it is. And hearing her say it, hearing someone outside of my family, outside of my church, outside of everyone who had told me to stay quiet. Hearing Patricia Harlow, a woman with floor-to-ceiling windows and a leather notebook, and the kind of composure that comes from knowing how to win. Say that what my father had done was a crime. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty about moving forward with this. That was the moment I understood that I was not betraying my family. I was protecting myself from a person who had planned this since I was 16 years old. She opened the second folder. She went through the documents with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times. The applications with his handwriting, the credit reports from all 3 bureaus with the accounts highlighted and dated, the FTC complaint, the screenshots I had taken of the accounts, printed and dated. She was building a timeline as she went, writing dates on a legal pad, drawing arrows to connect events, creating a visual map of how my father had systematically constructed his business on the foundation of my identity. And then she found it, tucked inside my folder of old tax documents, in a clear plastic sleeve, was a photocopy of my Social Security card. It was old. The colours were faded to a pale blue. The photocopy was not perfectly centered on the page. It had been made on one of those old office copiers that required you to line things up by eye. And in the corner, in my father's careful handwriting, was a date, 2001, and a note, family records. The handwriting was the same handwriting that was on 3 of the credit applications. The same precise letters. The same careful formation of numbers. I had forgotten the photocopy was there. I had not thought about it in years. It was just something my father had done when I was 16. made a copy of my Social Security card for the family records. It had seemed normal at the time. It was the kind of thing he did. He kept records. He kept copies of important documents. It had seemed like good parenting. Patricia held the photocopy and looked at me, and her expression did not change. But something in her eyes shifted, like she had found the piece of evidence that connected everything. "How old were you when he made this?" she asked. 16. "Did you give him permission to make this copy?" "No, but I didn't think it was unusual. He kept copies of everything. He kept a copy of your Social Security card," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "And then, 14 years later, he used that Social Security number to open 7 accounts in your name. That's not a coincidence. That's preparation." She set the photocopy down on the desk, and I looked at it, and I understood something I had not understood before. This was not something my father had done in a moment of desperation. This was something he had planned for. He had kept a photocopy of my Social Security card for 14 years, from when I was 16 until I was 30. He had waited until I was old enough to leave home, until I was building my own life, until I was far enough away that I would not notice the creditors calling. And then he had used it. "This," Patricia said, tapping the photocopy with her fountain pen, "is intent. This is the smoking gun. This tells me that your father did not make a mistake. This tells me that he planned to use your identity." She gathered all the documents and stacked them neatly on her desk, organizing them into piles by type. Applications in one stack, credit reports in another, my income documentation in a third. She worked in silence for a few minutes, arranging and rearranging until the papers told a story. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at me over her reading glasses. "I can build a federal case on this," she said. "Identity theft, fraud, forgery, Fair Credit Reporting Act violations. I can file formal disputes with every creditor and demand they remove the accounts from your report. I can sue your father for damages. But I need you to understand something before we move forward. Your father is going to fight this. Your family is going to pressure you to drop it. The church is going to tell you that you're betraying your family. Your sister is going to choose your father. And the question I need you to answer before we move forward is whether you're willing to go all the way, or whether you're going to cave when the pressure gets heavy." I looked at her, and I thought about the bathroom floor and the 11 minutes I spent waiting for my sister to call. I thought about Gerald Whitmore telling me that we don't do this to our fathers in public. I thought about my mother choosing my father without ever asking me what was true. I thought about blessing silence. And then I thought about the $340,000 house indicator. I thought about my credit score of 589. I thought about the fact that my father had made a photocopy of my Social Security card when I was 16 and held onto it for 14 years, waiting for the moment when he could use it. "I'm going all the way," I said. Patricia nodded. She did not smile. She did not congratulate me or offer any kind of reassurance. She just nodded, and she made a note in her leather notebook, and then she started listing everything she needed from me. Medical records, full bank statements going back 5 years, any communications with my father, emails, text messages, voicemails, any communications with the creditors, any documentation of payments made to any of the 7 accounts, We're going to make this so airtight that there is no question about what happened here, she said. Your father's going to try to claim he had permission. We're going to prove that he didn't. We're going to show the court that he had been planning this since you were a child. We're going to make sure that every creditor understands that these accounts were opened without your knowledge or consent. And we're going to make sure that your credit is restored. She walked me out of her office. And I remember the feeling of the hallway. The quiet. The professionalism. The sense that I had just entered into an agreement with someone who knew how to fight battles like this. And who did not lose. Patricia Harlow did not blink. She did not soften the truth. She just told me what needed to happen, and she made it clear that she would be the one to make it happen, and that all I had to do was hold the line. I walked to my car in the parking lot, and I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes before I started the engine. And I realized that the weight I had been carrying since that bathroom floor had shifted. It was not gone. But it was no longer entirely mine. It was shared now with someone who had the knowledge and the credentials and the absolute lack of concern about whether my father liked the outcome. Patricia Harlow was not going to tell me to forgive him. She was not going to tell me to think about family harmony. She was going to take every piece of evidence I gave her. The W-2s. The credit applications, the photocopy of my social security card, the timeline of my father's deception, and she was going to build a case that my father could not defend himself against. Patricia sent the certified letters out on a Tuesday. I know this because she sent me a photograph of the stack of envelopes sitting on her desk before they went to the postal service. 7 envelopes. Each one bearing her firm's name and address in the corner, each one bound for a different destination. 3 were going to the credit bureaus: Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. 6 were going to the creditors who had accounts bearing my name. All of them contained the same documents, organized with the precision that Patricia did everything. The FTC identity theft complaint I had filed, my W-2s for 2015 through 2019, the years showing I could not possibly have authorized business credit accounts, or the complete documentation of my actual income, the proof that I had been a full-time student and then a full-time employee making far too little money to justify a single commercial credit line, much less 7. Copies of the originating credit applications, each one bearing my father's handwriting, the signature line where he had signed something close to my name, and a legal brief that Patricia had written herself, 32 pages long, establishing the timeline, the intent, the pattern, and most importantly, establishing that account number 4's $340 charge, the one that had posted 11 days before I walked into First Meridian Bank, constituted active, ongoing fraud at the time of discovery. That was the key, Mahmoud, that single charge. It was not historical fraud from years ago that could be written off as a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was current fraud. It was proof that someone was still actively billing against my identity while I was sitting in Ramiro's office discovering that my future had already been sold. Patricia had made that distinction crystal clear in her legal brief. This was not a case of identity theft that happened long ago. This was a case of ongoing fraud at the time of discovery, which meant it was a federal matter, which meant different penalties and different protections. The envelopes went out by certified mail. Certified mail meant they had to be signed for. Certified mail meant there was a paper trail proving they had been received. Certified mail meant no one could later claim they never got the letters. Never knew what was coming. The same day, the envelopes went to the credit bureaus and creditors. Patricia sent another letter. This one went to my father at his address in Gwinnett County. I did not see the letter until weeks later, when Patricia gave me a copy for my records. It was addressed to Nonso Okafor, and it was from Patricia Harlow, Consumer Protection Attorney. The letter was formal, precise, and devastating. It informed him that his daughter had retained legal counsel regarding identity theft and fraud perpetrated in her name. It informed him that Patricia was in possession of documentation, establishing that he had opened multiple accounts using his daughter's identity without authorization. It informed him that his daughter had filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. It informed him that copies of this letter were being sent to all relevant creditors and credit bureaus. It informed him that he was potentially liable for damages under the Fair Credit Reporting Act and applicable state identity theft statutes. It gave him 30 days to respond. 30 days! That was the window. That was the time he had to either deny everything, or admit everything, or try to negotiate some kind of settlement. For 30 days. My father knew that his daughter had a lawyer, and his daughter's lawyer knew exactly what he had done. I did not know how he received the news. I did not know what expression crossed his face when he read that his daughter was suing him. I just knew that the letter was sent, and that he had received it, and that the machinery of the law was moving forward. For 31 days, I waited. I went to work. I sat at my desk at Meridian Health Systems, and I processed procurement requests, and I reviewed vendor contracts, and I attended meetings where people discussed supply chain logistics. And none of it felt real. I was operating in 2 timelines simultaneously. In one timeline, I was a senior procurement coordinator. In the other, I was a woman waiting to see if the legal system would decide that my father's crime was real enough to do something about it. I checked the credit bureaus obsessively. I pulled my credit reports every few days. Even though Patricia had told me it would take longer than that for changes to show. I watched my credit score, which had climbed slightly from 589 to 603, not because the accounts had been removed, but because time itself healed a small portion of the damage. I refreshed the Experian app on my phone multiple times a day, which was compulsive and not productive, but it gave me something to do with the nervous energy. The Dakota house was still there. The listing was still active. Other people had made offers. The realtor had called to ask if I wanted to increase my offer amount, and I had said no. I was waiting on some credit issues to be resolved. I did not tell her that I was waiting on the outcome of a lawsuit against my father. Patricia had explained that it could take months, that creditors might contest the disputed accounts, that the credit bureaus might need longer to investigate, that this process was not instant, even though it felt like it should be. Even though my life was suspended in the space between who I had been before Ramiro set down his pen and who I might become if this worked. On day 31. I was sitting at my desk at Meridian Health Systems when my Experian app sent a push notification. The notification was small, a banner at the top of my screen, but it said, "Account update. One of your accounts has been removed from your credit report." One of my accounts. The vendor credit line. The first one. The $8,500 account from March 2015. The account that had been opened when I was 19 years old and making minimum wage. The account that my father had opened with my social security number because the bank had told him. It was gone. I did not open the door. I closed it. I closed the office door and I locked it. And I sat down in my chair and I did not move for a long time. And then I cried. I did not cry the way I had cried on the bathroom floor. This was not the cry of someone who had lost everything. This was the cry of someone who had started to get something back. It was not graceful. It was not dignified. My shoulders shook. My chest heaved. I made sounds that I had not known I was capable of making. Sounds that came from somewhere deep in my body. From the place where I had been storing the weight of this for months. I sat in my chair with the door closed and my phone in my hand, and I looked at the notification again, and I read it again. One of your accounts has been removed from your credit report. Not disputed, not under investigation, removed, gone. The creditor had agreed that the account should not have existed, should not have been opened, should never have remained on my credit report. The legal machinery had worked. Patricia had done exactly what she said she would do. My father's crime had been documented so thoroughly, so methodically, so completely, that even the first creditor had agreed. This debt was not mine. It was a beginning. There were still 5 more accounts to remove. There was still the house in Decatur waiting. There was still my father, who would need to decide what he was willing to do or admit or pay. But in that moment, with the office door locked and a notification on my phone proving that the system had worked, I understood that I was going to get my life back. Not all of it at once. Not without more work, more patience, more legal machinery grinding forward. But I was going to get it back. The first account was gone. The other 6 would follow. I reapplied at First Meridian 53 days after Ramiro set down his pen and asked me about 7 accounts I had never authorized. The credit reports I submitted this time showed what should have been there all along. 7 accounts removed, a credit score of 700 to 1, and a debt-to-income ratio that finally made sense. I was not a risk. I was not a woman with $61,000 of unexplained debt. I was a woman with a job, a savings account that had been named Decatur for 4 years, and a credit history that reflected my actual financial behavior. I walked into First Meridian on a Tuesday morning with the folder of documents Patricia had prepared. The application was thorough. It included the letters from the credit bureaus confirming that all 7 accounts had been removed. It included copies of the FTC complaint. It included a letter from Patricia explaining the identity theft and the resolution. I laid it all on the desk in front of the loan officer handling my reapplication, and I watched her read through it. "This is clear," she said, looking up from the documents. "These accounts were fraudulently opened. They've all been removed. Your credit is restored. There's no reason we can't approve this application. Ramiro called me himself when the file was approved. He did not make me wait for a letter. He did not make me come into the office to hear the news. He just called. And his voice carried something that sounded like vindication on my behalf. Ms. Okafor, congratulations, he said. Your mortgage is approved. The closing date is set for 3 days from now. You're going to close on your house. The final walkthrough of the Decatur house happened on a Friday afternoon, 2 days before closing. I had seen the house before. I had walked through it in person and in my imagination 100 times. But This was different. This was the official walkthrough before closing. The last opportunity to confirm that nothing had changed since the offer was accepted. The real estate agent met me there at 3CP. The house smelled like old wood and the particular silence of a place that was about to change hands. I walked through every room slowly. The kitchen with the granite counter. The living room with the large windows facing the street. The master bedroom with the closet that was bigger than my first apartment. And finally, the second bedroom, the room I had imagined painted in Riverstone. The room that had been empty in my mind for so long that it felt strange to see it truly empty. Truly waiting. The closing was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 a.m. I arrived at the law office 15 minutes early and sat in the waiting room with my folder of documents and my checkbook and my government-issued ID. I did not check my phone. I did not think about my father or the church or my mother. I just sat there in the quiet waiting room, and I prepared myself for the moment when I would become a homeowner. When the closing attorney called my name, I walked into a conference room where 2 attorneys were seated at a long table, one for me and one for the sellers, with stacks of documents between them. Each one was flagged with a sticky note indicating where signatures were required. The purchase agreement, the promissory note, the document that said I owed the bank $340,000, the mortgage note, the title insurance policy, the homeowner's insurance policy, dozens of documents that translated the abstract concept of owning property into legal language. The closing attorney on my side, a woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, explained what each document meant. She moved through them with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. This document means you promise to pay back the money you borrowed. This document means the bank has a lien on the property. This document means the title company will ensure your ownership. And then she pulled out the deed. The deed is the document that matters most. The deed is the piece of paper that says who owns the property. It is recorded with the county. It is permanent. She placed it on the table in front of me, and she slid it across so I could see it clearly. And she pointed to the address line. The address was street address. Decatur, Georgia. My Decatur address. The address I'd saved for. The address I'd wanted so badly that I had named a savings account after it when I was 25 years old, and did not even know if it would be possible. The address that now belonged to me, documented on a legal deed, official and permanent. I looked at the address line. I did not cry. I did not smile. I felt something move inside my chest. Something like the feeling of a door opening after it had been locked for a very long time. This was the first legal document in my adult life that had my name and my actual address on the same page at the same time. Every other document, my driver's license, my tax returns, my bank statements, had either my name or my address, but not both together. This deed was the first official document that said, this woman, this name, this address, this property, all of it on the same page, all of it together, all of it mine. I reached out and I touched the address line with my index finger. I traced it across the page, feeling the paper beneath my fingertip, feeling the reality of it. I did not sign yet. I just touched it. The closing attorney waited. She understood that this was not just a transaction. She understood that this was a moment. Then I picked up the pen and I signed my name on every page that required a signature. I signed the deed, I signed the promissory note, I signed the mortgage note, I signed the title insurance and the homeowner's insurance. 53 pages of my signature. Each one a commitment. Each one a piece of paper that documented my right to own this house, to live in this house, to build a life in this house. When I finished signing, the closing attorney collected the papers. She explained that the deed would be recorded with the county within 3 to 5 business days. She handed me the house keys across the table. The keys were brass and new, and they felt substantial in my hand. These were the keys to my house. The house indicator that I had saved for while my father was opening accounts in my name. The house that I had reclaimed by refusing to accept his narrative, by calling Patricia Harlow, by documenting the fraud, by going through the legal process, by rebuilding my credit, by reapplying for the mortgage, by showing up at the closing table and signing my name. I drove directly to the house. I let myself in through the front door with the new keys. The house was empty. The floors were bare. The walls were unpainted. But it was mine. I walked through every room, the kitchen with the granite counter, the living room with the large windows, the master bedroom, and finally, the second bedroom, the empty room with Riverstones paint waiting on the walls, the room that could become anything I wanted it to become. I stood in the doorway of that empty room with the keys in my hand and the deed in my folder, and I understood that I had built this, not by accident, not by luck, not by anyone else's intervention. I had built this by refusing to accept the version of events that made me complicit in my own theft. I had built this by understanding that my father's crime was not my shame to carry. I had built this by making one phone call and then holding the line when the pressure came to back down. I walked through the house alone for the first time on the night the movers left. Patricia had taken me to dinner afterward, which had been her way of marking the moment as significant, as something that warranted acknowledgement beyond the legal paperwork and the bank transfers. We had sat at a restaurant with white tablecloths, and she had ordered wine, and she had told me that not all clients had the strength to hold the line the way I had. My friend who had driven me home. The same friend who had listened to me on the phone at 11:47 p.m. when I filed the FTC complaint, who had checked on me during the church circuit weeks, who had sat with me through the waiting and the uncertainty. She had pulled away from the curb only minutes earlier. The house was quiet in that particular way that empty houses are quiet. The kind of silence that comes from the absence of other people, other lives, other stories being lived in the walls. I turned on the lights as I walked through each room. The kitchen with the granite counter, the living room with the windows that faced the street, the master bedroom where I had not yet unpacked a single box, and finally, the second bedroom, the empty room that had been a question mark, a space of possibility, a vision I had held onto when everything else felt uncertain. I sat down on the floor of that empty room, and I did not cry. I sat there with my back against the wall and my knees pulled up slightly, and I thought about what it meant to own something that was entirely mine, that no one else had a claim on, that no one could take from me by signing documents I never saw or opening accounts in my name. I am not speaking to my father. I do not know if I ever will be. We have exchanged emails through Patricia's office regarding financial restitution. The amount he will owe me for the damage he caused. Calculated in concrete terms. Due on a specific timeline. Enforced by legal agreement. But there has been no conversation. No moment where he has attempted to tell me his side of the story, or where I have attempted to listen. The version of events he presented, that he was building something for the family, that we benefited from his work, that I owed him for the house I lived in and the food I ate. That version has been replaced by the legal documentation of what he actually did. The signature on the applications bearing his handwriting, the photocopy of my Social Security card he made when I was 16, the timeline showing accounts opened in my name while I was building my own life, unaware that he was simultaneously building a claim against my future. I think about the word responsible and what it meant in my family. It meant I could be trusted. It meant I did not ask for things. It meant I absorbed disappointments without complaint and processed conflicts privately and prioritized family harmony over my own clarity. It meant I was the one who would not make trouble, who would not embarrass anyone, who would not air family business in public. It meant that when I discovered my father had stolen from me, my first instinct was to manage his feelings rather than hold him accountable. It meant that when the church elder called to tell me I was betraying my family, I sat on a bathroom floor and seriously considered backing down. It meant that my mother could choose my father's reputation over my future and feel justified in doing so because I was the one who would understand. Because I was the responsible one. The cost of being called responsible was that no one questioned what I was responsible for. No one asked if I had agreed to carry the weight of his choices. No one suggested that protecting my own future was not the same as betraying the family. No one said that a family that asks you to absorb their crimes in silence is not protecting you. It is protecting itself. No one pointed out that the only person who benefited from my silence was the person who had stolen from me. I learned the difference between a family that protects its members and a family that protects its image. My family chose the image. They chose my father's reputation over my credit score. They chose to pressure me into silence over asking him what he had done. They chose to invoke God and tradition and blood relation as reasons I should forgive without explanation, forget without resolution, move forward without acknowledgement. They chose the version of events that required the least change from them. I learned that love does not require self-destruction. That generosity without boundaries is not generosity. It is permission for someone else to take. That responsibility for my own life is not the same as responsibility for my father's choices. That holding someone accountable is not the same as betraying them. Even though people who have benefited from your silence will tell you it is. That the people who tell you to forgive quickly are usually the people who benefit from you not asking questions. The version of myself who would have quietly signed anything to keep the peace, that version is gone. I do not grieve her. She was not protecting the family. She was protecting a man who had spent 10 years building a business on the foundation of her name. She was protecting a system that relied on her willingness to absorb harm without complaint. She was protecting people who had chosen her father's reputation over her future. She was complicit in her own erasure, and she did not even know it. I sit on the floor of this empty bedroom in the house that belongs entirely to me, and I know that I am not responsible for making anyone feel better about what I did. I am not responsible for softening the truth so that my father can live with what he did. I am not responsible for managing my mother's heartbreak, or my sister's confusion, or my church's discomfort with the fact that I held someone accountable for a crime. I am not responsible for their willingness to side with him because it was easier than siding with the truth. I am only responsible for the choices I make moving forward. I am making them for myself now. What I know is that the moment a person chooses to use you, whether that person is your father or your church or your family, they have already decided what they think you are worth. Your job is not to convince them otherwise. Your job is to decide for yourself what you are worth and to build a life that reflects that value. My job is to live in this house, to paint this empty bedroom whatever color I choose, to decide who I invite into my life and who I do not, to know that I earned this, not through sacrifice or suffering or quiet acceptance, but through holding the line when it would have been easier to give in. I know that accountability is not punishment, even though people who fear it will call it that. I know that walking away from people who betray you is not cold, even though people who profit from your presence will say it is. I know that protecting yourself is not selfish, even though families built on your sacrifice will insist that it is. And I know that I will stand on the floor of this empty room in this house that is entirely mine, and I will decide